My name is Bill, and I'm 52. My wife, Amanda, is 47, but easily looks younger. She's striking. Tall, with long blonde hair, pale skin, and a fit figure that she maintains through regular workouts and a healthy lifestyle. We've been together for 24 years, and in just a month, I thought we'd be celebrating our 25th anniversary. But things have started to fall apart. We have two grown sons, Peter and Ted, both recently married and starting families of their own. Thankfully, they both live close by, so we see them frequently. I work for a major pharmaceutical company in New Jersey, one that produces both brand name and generic drugs. We're one of the biggest players on the East Coast. Lately, the FDA has been all over us, keeping a close watch after they flagged some inconsistencies in our records. Since then, we've been hit with relentless audits, and it'll likely continue until we get everything cleared up. As the VP of Compliance, my schedule has been grueling. I've been working long hours, and twice a month, I travel to one of our far-off warehouses to supervise drug inspections. The workload has been overwhelming, but I've been training 3 new compliance techs to take over, which has started to ease the burden. The stress has taken a toll on my personal life, but since we're close to finalizing our recertification, I've begun scaling back. My plan was to retire once everything was in place, hopefully around our anniversary. I hadn't told Amanda yet because I wanted it to be a surprise. One afternoon, with a bit of rare free time, I went downtown to find a jeweler. I wanted to get something special for Amanda to mark our 25th anniversary. I found a small hidden jewelry shop down an alley, away from the bustling main street. A friend had recommended it after having a custom locket made for his wife. I had a similar idea in mind. The owner, a Pakistani man who had lived in the US for over 15 years, spoke perfect English. I explained what I was looking for. I had an old 1.15 carat diamond ring I no longer wore, the diamond still flawless. Amanda had always admired it, so I thought it would be perfect to have it reset into a necklace for her. After carefully examining the diamond, the jeweler complimented its quality and showed me a range of white gold and sterling silver settings. I selected one that had 3 smaller diamonds surrounding the center stone. It was beautiful. We agreed on the price, and I left the ring with him. He took a photo of the diamond through his scope and gave me a copy for security. It would be ready in 2 weeks, just in time. As I left the shop and stepped back onto the main street, something unusual caught my eye. Amanda was walking out of a hotel across the way. Instinctively, I ducked into the alley, not wanting her to see me. I watched as she hailed a cab. I was confused. She hadn't mentioned being downtown or having any reason to be at a hotel. My confusion deepened when I saw Roger, a close friend of mine, walking out right behind her. He said something to her, making her laugh before she got into the cab. Roger then headed off in the opposite direction. Roger and I had been friends for over 10 years. He had helped us buy our house back when he worked as a realtor, and over the years, he and his wife, Betty, had become part of our social circle. We had even taken a few vacations together before work started dominating my life. As I stood there watching, Amanda's cab merged into the traffic, leaving me wondering what on earth had just happened. At first, I thought maybe she was planning some surprise for our anniversary and that Roger was helping her, but that didn't sit well with me either. Still, I decided not to jump to conclusions and see how things unfolded. That night, I intended to casually ask Amanda a few questions to see if she'd bring up anything about being downtown. Our home is a spacious 2-story colonial in a nice neighborhood. Between my job and an inheritance from my parents that had nearly doubled thanks to good investments, we've been financially comfortable. Amanda and I agreed not to touch the inheritance until I retired. Now that Peter and Ted were settled in their own lives, the house felt too large for just the 2 of us, but we couldn't imagine leaving it. I enjoyed coming home to Amanda every night. She'd always have a drink ready, and we'd talk about our day. Tonight, though, felt different. When I got home, I stepped into the kitchen, set down my briefcase, and took off my jacket and tie, hanging them up neatly. I went to the room we called the library, where Amanda usually waited for me. We greeted each other as usual, and she asked how my day had been. I told her it was productive. I had wrapped up some things and was ready for my upcoming trip. She mentioned casually that she'd been home all day, tidying up the house. Her comment set off alarm bells in my mind. Why would she say she had been home all day when I had clearly seen her downtown earlier? Amanda wasn't a great liar, and something about this didn't sit right with me. I decided to keep pressing gently and see if she slipped up. Casually, I asked Amanda if she had seen Roger recently. I mentioned I needed to pass along some information about a drug issue he had asked me about and figured he might stop by soon. Without hesitation, she said she hadn't seen him since we visited their place the previous week. The lies were stacking up. I knew if I kept pressing, she would eventually slip, but for now, I let it go. My gut told me this was more than just a passing suspicion. Amanda and I hadn't been intimate in over 6 months. I had tried initiating things a few times lately, but every time she turned me down with some excuse. The last time was just a few nights ago, on Sunday, when she claimed a sudden headache. I didn't push it, avoiding any argument. But now, a nagging thought was creeping in. Maybe there was more to her coldness than I wanted to admit. Trying to ease the tension, I suggested we invite Roger and Betty over for dinner that week. Maybe Friday. Amanda just shrugged, saying she wasn't really up for it, and proposed we push it to next week. Convenient, since she knew I'd be out of town then, and I hate making plans when I'm away. So I pushed back, insisting we do it this week. I even asked if she and Roger had a falling out I didn't know about, given how uneasy she seemed when I mentioned him. That question struck a nerve. Amanda quickly stood up, mumbling something about needing to use the bathroom, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Her reaction, her uncomfortable body language, it was all leading me toward the conclusion I had been dreading. Amanda was hiding something, and Roger was a part of it. But when she returned, I chose not to press her further. Trying to change the subject, I asked if she had thought about our upcoming anniversary. I floated the idea of having a small party at home with close friends, Roger and Betty, Charlie and Carol, and inviting the kids and their spouses. I even suggested hiring a caterer to make it easy. Amanda just shrugged again, saying she hadn't given it much thought, and asked if that's what I wanted. I told her it sounded like a good idea, especially since things hadn't exactly been exciting between us lately. She raised an eyebrow, asking what I meant by not exciting. I explained that work had taken up so much of my time, leaving little room for us, but that didn't mean I was too tired for intimacy. I brought up how she hadn't shown any interest in 6 months, and I couldn't figure out why. Amanda's response was dismissive. She claimed she hadn't been feeling well, then turned the blame on me, saying I was the one who hadn't been in the mood. Her tone wasn't angry, more frustrated, knowing my points were valid, but unwilling to offer any real explanation. I apologized, saying I'd back off, assuming she had her reasons even if I didn't understand them. I reassured her that I would handle all the anniversary plans, so she wouldn't need to worry. I also apologized for mentioning our lack of intimacy, promising to wait until she was ready to talk about it. Then, I quietly left the room. In my study, I switched on the TV, flipping through channels without paying attention. My mind was racing. I needed time to think. My upcoming trip would be the key moment. Amanda and Roger wouldn't dare do anything while I was around, but once I left town, they might assume they were in the clear. Amanda might think I didn't know anything, but she couldn't be completely sure. By Thursday, I made a call to an old friend who worked in electronics. We had teamed up on a few projects over the years, and I trusted him enough to let him in on what I was planning. Without hesitation, he recommended the equipment I'd need. A quick call to the supply store he suggested, and everything was delivered to my office that same afternoon. It pays to have friends who can make things happen quickly. The plan was simple. I had 10 small voice-activated bugs, perfect for discreetly placing around the house. Along with them came 2 receivers, one for short-range monitoring, covering up to 300 feet, and another battery-operated, with a range of up to a mile. The short-range receiver would cover the bugs I'd plant in different rooms. The long-range one, that would go in Amanda's purse, with the receiver hidden in her car. That way, I could listen in on any conversations she had while out driving or running errands. The receiver in the trunk would record everything, with enough storage for up to 5 hours of audio. That evening, once Amanda left to run errands, I got to work. I planted the bugs in key spots around the house and set up the recording device in my basement workshop. I even tested it, turning on a radio in the spare room and heading downstairs to listen. It worked perfectly. The final task was to slip the bug into her purse and install the recorder in her car. Luckily, Amanda fell asleep early on the living room couch. I took the opportunity to quietly place the bug in her purse, then slipped outside to set up the recorder in her car. A quick test later confirmed everything was functioning just as planned. I was ready. Friday dragged on, each minute feeling longer than the last. I was itching to know what I'd find, but I had to wait until after dinner to check the recordings. A part of me still hoped that I wouldn't discover anything, that my suspicions were nothing more than paranoia. I wished for my life to stay as it was, boring but safe. Yet, deep down, I feared the worst, that Amanda was indeed cheating. My thoughts spiraled all day. Why would she betray me? What had gone wrong? Why hadn't she come to me to fix whatever had gone off track? After all, we'd been together for 25 years, and until now, I believed everything had been fine. Dinner that evening was a tense, quiet affair. Amanda seemed distracted, lost in her own thoughts, while I was drowning in anxiety, eager to uncover what the recordings might reveal. We barely spoke, going through the motions, until she excused herself and headed to bed early. Once I was sure she had fallen asleep, I slipped down to the basement and retrieved the recorder. The counter indicated there was something recorded. My heart raced as I rewound the tape and hit play. At first, all I heard was the usual background noise, the phone ringing, Amanda answering. I could only hear her side of the conversation, but it wasn't hard to fill in the blanks. It went something like this. Hello? Why are you calling now? What do you want? No, I can't meet today or tomorrow. Not until he's out of town. Same time and place, okay? Goodbye. That was all I needed. I didn't even bother checking the car recorder. Amanda hadn't left the house that day, and the phone call alone told me everything. She was having an affair. The weekend that followed was one of the longest, most excruciating stretches of my life. I stayed away from Amanda as much as possible, simmering in a mix of anger and hurt. I wasn't ready to confront her yet. The pain was too raw. I needed more proof, more time to process. I wanted to catch Amanda and Roger in the act, not just for my own closure, but to have solid evidence in case it came to legal matters down the line. So, I decided to wait until after our anniversary party to confront her. The plan was already taking shape in my mind, an anniversary she would never forget, for all the wrong reasons. Over the next 2 weeks, I stuck to my plan. Amanda and Roger continued their secret meetups, and I kept collecting recordings that confirmed what I already knew. Their next rendezvous was set for Wednesday, conveniently the day I was supposed to be out of town. I could hardly wait for the day to arrive. That Wednesday, I came home early while Amanda was busy setting the table for dinner. Slipping outside, I retrieved the recorder from her car's trunk and brought it down to the basement. There were 2 hours of recorded audio, and my tension built as I waited for dinner to finish, eager to listen. Afterward, I casually mentioned I'd be working in the basement for a while. She barely noticed, absorbed in her knitting. Downstairs, I pressed play. The first part of the tape was nothing unusual, small talk, idle chatter. But soon enough, their conversation shifted, and it was clear. Amanda and Roger had met at their usual spot. They didn't waste time. The flirtation started light and quickly escalated. What hurt the most wasn't just the affair. It was how routine it seemed to them, as if it were just another part of their day. Then came the unmistakable sounds. Grunts, moans, the creak of a bed. It was gut-wrenching. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, was unraveling in those moments. But what struck me even more than the betrayal was the lack of passion. Amanda's voice sounded distant, indifferent, like she was just going through the motions. The whole thing lasted barely half an hour and felt mechanical, void of any real emotion. It left me questioning everything I thought I understood about us. After the recording ended, I rewound the tape, made a copy, and locked it in my safe. The original stayed in my briefcase, ready for when I needed it. That night, sitting across from Amanda, knowing what I'd heard, I could barely stand to look at her. She went through her usual routine, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her. I wasn't ready to confront her yet, not until everything was set in place. 3 days before our anniversary party, something unexpected happened. While listening to one of the latest recordings, the doorbell rang. Roger had shown up at the house. I couldn't make out everything from the recording since they were near the door, but Amanda's tone said it all. She was furious, scolding him for showing up at our home and bringing their affair into our space. Their argument was brief, ending with Amanda slamming the door in his face. From what I gathered, Roger wanted more from her, but Amanda was firm about not crossing certain lines. While it was a small relief, it didn't change the reality of the situation. I contacted my lawyer and finalized the divorce papers, but I kept my silence, waiting until the anniversary party to reveal everything. The plan was in motion. All that remained was to let it play out. The party was set for Friday night, the day before our actual anniversary. It worked for most of our friends and family, and with everything catered, there wasn't much left for us to do but get dressed and greet the guests. That morning, I decided to drop my cold demeanor, at least for a while. I needed the party to go off without a hitch before everything came crashing down. About an hour before the guests were due to arrive, Amanda and I were getting ready in the bedroom. I casually asked if she was going to wear the blue dress I'd bought her last year, the one I loved on her. It accentuated everything that made her so beautiful. She said she planned to wear it, though she admitted she didn't think it looked as good on her as I claimed. Still, since it was our anniversary, she agreed to wear it. I kept my outfit simple, a shirt and tie, nothing fancy. For the first time in what felt like forever, Amanda smiled. It almost felt normal, but I knew better. I wanted her to enjoy the evening, unaware of what was coming. By 6:45, we were ready. I watched her in that blue dress, feeling a lump rise in my throat. Despite everything, a part of me still loved this woman. We had spent nearly all our adult lives together, and seeing her now, knowing what was about to unfold, nearly broke me. I had to sit down, the weight of it all crashing down on me. Before heading downstairs to greet the guests, I retrieved the necklace I had custom made for our anniversary. I opened the gold box and fastened it around her neck. Amanda admired herself in the mirror, thanking me. She said it was beautiful and promised she would treasure it forever. She kissed me, and in that fleeting moment of affection, I felt a bittersweet pang, knowing the devastation about to follow. The first guests arrived right on time. Roger and Betty, of course. I shook Roger's hand, pretending nothing was wrong, while Betty greeted Amanda like an old friend. Roger congratulated me, saying I had it all: a wonderful family, a beautiful home, and a stunning wife. I thanked him, but I couldn't resist adding, "But you know, Roger, things aren't always as they seem, are they?" He gave me a puzzled look but shrugged it off. I turned to Betty, hugged her, and whispered softly, "Sometimes, things aren't what they seem." She looked at me with concern, but I shook my head, signaling that now wasn't the time. The evening carried on smoothly. More guests arrived, and the party was in full swing. I kept a close eye on Amanda and Roger. They exchanged glances throughout the night, but I made sure they never had a moment alone together. At one point, Amanda grabbed Roger's elbow and pulled him aside to talk in a corner, but I stayed nearby, ensuring they didn't get any real privacy. When dinner was announced, we all gathered in the dining room. The seating had been arranged beforehand. I was seated between my daughters-in-law, with Peter and Ted flanking Amanda. The meal was perfect, the catering flawless, but for me, it was just a prelude to what was coming next. After dinner, I stood up, tapping my knife against the glass to grab everyone's attention. This was the moment I had been building up to for weeks. As the room fell silent, I thanked everyone for coming, expressing my gratitude for their support on such a special occasion. Then, turning to Amanda, I said, "And finally, I want to raise a toast to my beautiful wife, Amanda." All eyes turned to her. I placed my glass down without taking a sip, a small, deliberate gesture that only Amanda seemed to notice. Her smile wavered, and when our eyes met, confusion flickered across her face. She didn't know what was coming, but she sensed that something was off. The rest of the night passed in a blur of chatter and dessert. As I made my rounds among the guests, I felt Roger watching me. He approached eventually, concern evident in his expression. He said that both Betty and Amanda had mentioned I seemed off and asked if something was bothering me, perhaps something work-related. He even offered to help if I needed it. I smiled, telling him everything was fine, but said I could use his and Betty's help with something important. I invited them over for breakfast the next morning at 8:30, explaining that I needed their input. Roger hesitated but eventually agreed, though I could see suspicion brewing in his eyes. He pressed for more details, but I waved it off, saying it was a surprise, even for Amanda. Reluctantly, he nodded, accepting my vague explanation. I watched as he made his way back to Betty, whispering something to her. Then he moved over to Amanda, speaking to her quietly. From where I stood, I could see them speculating about what I might be planning, and Amanda's posture seemed to relax a little. Whatever they imagined, they were far from the truth. As the night wound down, I found myself eager for it to end. Keeping up the act was growing harder by the minute. One by one, our friends began saying their goodbyes. Roger and Betty were the first to leave. Before heading out, Betty pulled me aside, offering her support if I ever needed someone to talk to. I thanked her, though guilt gnawed at me. She had no idea about the storm she was about to walk into, completely unaware of the mess her husband and Amanda had created. Roger, standing beside her, remained equally oblivious to what was about to unfold. Our sons and their wives were the last to go. They congratulated us once more, we exchanged hugs, and then they too departed. Finally, the house was quiet. The caterers had cleaned up and left, and Amanda had disappeared upstairs. I lingered for a moment, letting the silence settle in as I gathered my thoughts. When I finally made my way to our bedroom, I found Amanda still dressed in her blue dress, sitting by the window. I sat in the chair opposite her, the weight of the tension between us heavy in the room. We just stared at each other, the silence stretching uncomfortably. Eventually, Amanda spoke, her voice cautious. She asked if she could bring up something from the party. I nodded, telling her she could always ask. After all, what's a marriage without openness? She hesitated, then asked why I hadn't taken a drink during my toast. I shrugged, deflecting, and asked her what she thought. She didn't have a clear answer but pressed again, asking if she had done something to upset me. I turned the question back on her, wondering aloud if she had done anything that might make me angry. Her response was shaky, insisting she hadn't, though her uncertainty was evident. She was trying to make sense of the situation, but nothing was clicking for her. Standing up, I suddenly felt too tired to continue the conversation. I told her I wasn't in the mood to discuss it tonight, and that I'd be sleeping in the guest room. I promised we'd talk everything through tomorrow. Without waiting for her response, I left the room. I had never shut Amanda out like this before, never locked her out of our bedroom. The weight of that decision pressed heavily on me, but I knew I couldn't face her just yet. In the guest room, I opened my briefcase, double-checking that everything was in order. The divorce papers and the audio recordings were neatly organized, ready for what was coming. I undressed, turned off the lights, and lay down, though I knew sleep wouldn't come easily. An hour passed before I heard a soft knock on the door. Amanda's voice followed, asking if she could come in. I stayed silent, unwilling to let her in. Not just into the room, but into the truth. She knocked again, but when I didn't answer, she eventually gave up and returned to our bedroom. Lying there, I felt the tears come, and eventually exhaustion took over, and I drifted off. The next morning, I woke up early but stayed in bed for a while, running through the day ahead in my mind. I heard Amanda moving around downstairs, and by the time I got up, it was nearly 8:15. When I walked into the kitchen, I found her sitting at the table, staring into her coffee. She looked up as I entered, her eyes red and puffy from crying. In a small, fragile voice, she asked if I suspected something, if that was the reason for everything. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Amanda wiped her face quickly and went to answer the door. Standing there, as expected, were Roger and Betty. Roger explained that I had invited them for breakfast, and Amanda's confusion was plain, though she welcomed them in. The panic in her eyes was unmistakable. Betty noticed Amanda's distress and gently asked if she was all right, but Amanda brushed it off, claiming she was fine. Returning to me, Amanda demanded to know what was going on, why I had invited them without telling her. I didn't answer. Instead, I made my way to the living room, greeting Roger and Betty, and invited them to sit. They settled on the couch side by side, while Amanda, visibly anxious, sat in her favorite chair. I stood in the middle of the room, facing them all. This was it, the moment of truth. I reached into my briefcase, pulling out 2 large envelopes, and paused, taking a breath. I've been thinking about this for a while, I began, meeting their eyes. I have a few surprises for everyone. Confusion spread across their faces, especially Roger's. You both know I've been working long hours, traveling more than I should, but last week I made a decision. I've hired new staff to take over my responsibilities, and as of last week, I've resigned. I'm officially retiring. Amanda gasped, asking why I hadn't told her. Roger chimed in, agreeing that I deserved a break and should have stepped down sooner. I'm glad you both think that, I continued, because I had planned a special trip for Amanda and me for our 25th anniversary. I booked a flight to Miami, and from there, we'd board a cruise. Amanda's smile faltered. What do you mean by had planned? Amanda's question lingered in the air, thick with tension. She was visibly anxious now, sensing that something terrible was about to happen, though she had no idea what. Roger looked utterly bewildered, his brow furrowed as confusion settled in, while Betty remained silent, her face etched with concern as she watched the scene unfold. Taking a steady breath, I braced myself for the inevitable. I was planning to take you on that trip, Amanda. I began, keeping my voice steady. But then I realized it might conflict with your Wednesday afternoon meetings with Roger at the hotel. The room fell into an eerie silence. Roger's face drained of all color, turning ghostly pale. Amanda's eyes widened in shock, her mouth hanging open as she struggled to process what I had just said. Across the room, Betty slowly turned to look at Roger, her expression darkening as the reality of the situation hit her. Without another word, I walked over to the table and pressed play on the small recorder I had brought. The room filled with Amanda and Roger's voices. Casual, intimate, damning. Every incriminating word echoed through the silence, cutting through the air like a blade. Amanda's hand flew to her mouth as a broken sob escaped her. She collapsed back into her chair, her face pale, her body trembling. Roger, frozen in place, stared blankly, his eyes wide with shock, as if he couldn't comprehend what was happening. Betty, on the other hand, was far from passive. With a sharp intake of breath, Betty shot up from the couch, her face twisted in rage. "You absolute bastard!" she spat at Roger, her voice shaking with fury. Without hesitation, she raised her hand and slapped him hard across the face. The sound of the slap echoed through the room, reverberating off the walls as Roger stumbled back, clutching his cheek, too stunned to speak. But Betty wasn't done. She turned on Amanda next, her eyes burning with anger. "You've ruined everything," she hissed. 2 marriages, 10 years of friendship. For what? For this? She gestured toward Roger with disgust, shaking her head in disbelief. By now, Amanda was inconsolable, her sobs racking her body as she buried her face in her hands. She didn't even attempt to defend herself. I stood there, watching it all unfold, feeling strangely detached, as if I were merely an observer to someone else's tragedy. Finally, I stepped forward, my voice cold and composed. "Roger, I want you out of my house, and I never want to see you again." Roger, still reeling from the slap, opened his mouth as if to say something, but I silenced him with a raised hand. "You were supposed to be my friend," I said, my tone steady, "but you betrayed me. Now leave." Betty, still shaking with rage, grabbed her purse and stormed out of the house without a word. Roger, his head hanging low, followed her like a man who had just lost everything. I didn't bother to watch them leave. Their part in my life was over. Turning back to Amanda, I saw her still hunched over in the chair, her body trembling as tears streamed down her face. When she finally looked up at me, her eyes were filled with desperation. "Please, Bill," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I was lonely, confused. Please let me explain." Her words were exactly what I had expected, but they no longer held any meaning for me. "I've thought about this a lot," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I considered every option, whether I could forgive you, whether we could somehow rebuild, but I can't. You've broken everything we built together, Amanda." Reaching into my briefcase, I pulled out the second envelope and held it out to her. "These are divorce papers," I said quietly. "I had them drawn up last week. If you sign them without a fight, I'll let you keep the house and give you a generous settlement. But if you contest it, I'll take everything. And I'll make sure our sons know exactly what happened. I've already written them letters explaining everything. The choice is yours." Amanda collapsed onto the floor, her sobs echoing through the room. "Please, Bill, don't do this," she begged, her voice breaking. "I'll do anything. I love you. I never meant to hurt you. Just give me one more chance." I shook my head, my resolve unshaken. "It's too late, Amanda. I'm leaving for what was supposed to be our anniversary trip. My lawyer will handle the rest." She continued to plead, her voice raw with emotion, but I was already past the point of caring. The sound of her voice on those tapes, the image of her betrayal, it was too deeply etched into my mind. There was no undoing the damage. I turned and walked out of the house, leaving her crying on the floor. As I pulled out of the driveway, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw her running after me, collapsing onto the driveway as I drove away. For a moment, I considered stopping, watching her through the mirror. A part of me wondered if she truly understood the depth of the pain I had been carrying since discovering her betrayal. But I knew it didn't matter anymore. I pressed down on the accelerator and drove forward, toward my new life. In the end, the divorce went through. Amanda signed the papers, keeping the house and the settlement. Roger and Betty didn't survive their fallout either. I kept in touch with Betty on occasion, but Roger was gone from my life for good. In the end, everyone got what they deserved, or perhaps not. Life doesn't always deal justice neatly, and that's how my 25-year marriage came to an end.